You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation. Matt, one thing that is for sure in this podcast is we do not condone violence. But in the past, we have talked about beating dead horses or other sorts of violent acts. And today has the potential to become one of those episodes because I think you want to talk about killing your darlings.
Yeah.
But with caution, I want to ask what you mean by that.
Well, that's true. That's funny. I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah. So first of all, yeah, we don't condone violence, even though we use a lot of violent imagery in here. Like you say, we're killing horses,
Yes.
And today we're killing darlings. And just the other day, I was using the word in a conversation with somebody. I was using the word brutality. And the person said, well, why don't you just use the word straightforwardness? So,
Yeah.
Okay. But today's topic is killing your darlings, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
I heard you talk about that, and I want to hear your thoughts on that.
I'll tell you about my thoughts on that. And killing your darlings, this phrase, it's usually attributed to the American author William Faulkner, who was writing in the 1920s and 1930s. And the English majors amongst our listener base are going to be really angry at me because I have never written or never read any of his books. I don't even know what books he wrote. In fact, I had to Google it just to find out if he had written any books that I had read, and the answer was no.
No. Okay.
Yeah. So I love this phrase, kill your darlings. I love this phrase. I use it all the time. It was attributed to American author William Faulkner. And the honest answer is that Matt has never read any of his books, not even one. In fact, Matt had to Google just to find out when this person was writing. Anyway,
But the phrase stuck with you.
Yeah, the phrase has always stuck with me. I've been using it for years. It's a great tool for summarizing presentations or cutting time off of presentations. You know, if you know that your presentation is going to run over time. And as I was writing some notes about this phrase, kill your darlings, and as I was writing some notes about what it means for presentations, I thought about a previous episode that we have done on this podcast. Actually, I think we've done a couple episodes on this podcast about, we were calling them non-linear presentations. You know how when you walk into your presentation, and instead of saying,
yes,
okay, I'm going to talk about topics such as subject number 1, and then subject number 2, and then subject number 3, you just kind of go in there and you say, okay, where do you want me to start? Hey, everybody, welcome.
Yeah.
Today I'm going to talk about blah, 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 and where would you like me to start? And then you jump into wherever they're going to start. Do you remember those episodes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
So as I was making this notes today for Kill Your Darlings, I realized that it's kind of an alternative to the nonlinear presentation. So if you don't like the idea of the courage that a nonlinear presentation might take, for some people it's not a problem, for other people it's a huge courage hurdle. So if it's a huge courage hurdle for you, then here's an alternative that might be an easier or more accessible technique for you. And there are a couple steps to killing your darlings. One is that you have to get really focused on your subject matter. And I do a lot of language-related stuff, language-related teaching, English classes and stuff like that, since I'm a native English speaker in Turkey. And I was working with a student the other day, or last week or something, and he came to me with a presentation and wanted to spend some time in the native language, in this case Turkish, wanted to spend some time with the presentation in Turkish in order to be able to summarize it. And then at the next class, we would work on putting that summary into English. But he wanted to summarize it in Turkish first and asked if that would be a problem. He asked me if that would be a problem. And the answer is a resounding no, because summarizing the subject matter of your presentation is about becoming clear on the subject matter And it doesn't matter what language you're doing that in. You could be doing it in your native language, or you could be doing it in Turkish, or you could be doing it in Chinese or French or whatever. It doesn't matter what you do that in. In any language that'll help you get clear on the subject matter is going to be fine. And another thing is that when you are summarizing a presentation, you have to pack a lot of meaning into a few words, because whereas before maybe you had, let's say, 50 words for a slide, 50 words to explain what you wanted to explain on that slide. Maybe now in your summary, maybe you only have 15 words or 18 words or something like that. It'll be some fairly radical cut. And in order to make a fairly radical cut like that, you need to be able to pack a lot of meaning into the remaining words. And that requires not a native speaker vocabulary, but a fairly wide vocabulary, because you need to know which words are going to get across the meaning that I want to get across. It's kind of like we mentioned before that I wanted to use the word brutality, and somebody suggested, well, why don't you use the word straightforwardness instead? Brutality has meaning to it that straightforwardness does not. And straightforwardness has meaning to it that brutality does not. So when you're summarizing, you have to be, when you're summarizing, you have to be able to make choices about the words that you're using.
Well, those are really interesting ideas, and I can certainly see them being applied to a number of occasions, not only presentations, but in other areas of life as well. But one thing that I'm wondering, do you get any pushback from clients when you advocate that?
Yeah. I definitely get pushback from that. And the main pushback,
Tell me.
The main pushback that I get, and this comes from pretty much everybody, initially at least, the main pushback that I get from pretty much everybody initially is that the customer or my colleagues or whoever you're speaking to, whoever you're presenting to, they're going to think that I don't know my subject matter. They're not going to know how deeply I know my subject matter, because I have removed a lot of it from the presentation. And the answer to that is that they're going to ask you anyway. It's not like you're going to give your 20% of the presentation and everybody's going to stay shut up and then leave the room and think you're stupid. It's not like that at all. You're going to be in that room forever. They're going to be peppering you with questions. And a lot of that knowledge that you have killed off is going to come back. And then the second pushback that I get to that, or the resulting pushback that I get to that, is usually, well, if they're going to ask about that anyway, then shouldn't I just include my knowledge anyway? And that's an excellent question. And the answer to that, I think, how in some previous episodes we have talked about nonlinear presentations, and with a nonlinear presentation being that you walk into the room and instead of on your agenda slide saying, oh, I'm going to talk about topic 1, and then I'm going to talk about topic 2, and then I'm going to talk about topic 4. You go in there and you say, hey, I'm going to talk about this subject in general, and where would you like me to start? Like basically like that, right? Yeah. So the customers or whoever you're speaking to, they're going to ask you about this deeper knowledge that you have, or they're going to ask you questions that require this deeper knowledge. And so you're going to have a two-way conversation. But the thing is, the difference is that if you include all of the knowledge that you have from the very beginning, the customers don't get a chance to cherry pick the things that are most interesting to them. You're just dumping out a bunch of stuff that you think is interesting, and you might be wasting the audience's time. They might really want to ask you about topic B, but you're showing off your knowledge on topic A. And so this process of killing off your darlings, this process of killing off your darlings actually opens the way for a nonlinear presentation, which, to give a truly nonlinear presentation is kind of a high courage hurdle to clear. Whereas killing off your darlings and letting the customers drive the conversation afterwards, that's a less high or more accessible courage hurdle to have to clear. So this is possibly look at this as another way to achieve the same thing.
It's a very good point, and it makes me think how you also give the pleasure to the audience of asking the questions and getting responses to them.
Yeah.
I mean, let's say in the presentation, 3 points will be talked about, one being the most important one, and the 2 being like supporting arguments, let's say. Instead of you talking about all 3 of them and asking questions, I think it will be more conducive to an interactive presentation.
True.
if you talked about point number 1 and 2, left the third point. I mean, I'm thinking out loud. Let's dig on that.
Okay.
You left the third point out with the feeling that it will come as a question from the audience. And when it does, you respond to the question elegantly. I think the overall experience is on a higher note than you just talking about the 3 points and having no questions.
Yeah. So, and I've talked about this process a little bit from my perspective. Tell me a little bit about how this looks from a slide design perspective. How would you implement this in the slide design world?
Well, I think killing your darlings is a very applicable phenomenon in the slide design as well.
Okay.
But not maybe as high of a ground as you talked about, because what usually happens is you have an upcoming presentation and you start designing the slides immediately. You start with slide 1, you start with slide 2. You don't move on to the third slide before you finish the second one and before the second one is perfect, let's say. I mean, it's not the way to go, and I strongly advocate against that, but that's usually the road that is taken. But what happens is after you spend a gazillion hours designing 25 slides, let's say, to perfection, there may be a point where you may have to remove or delete 5, 6, or 7 of your slides.
Okay.
Meaning you may have to kill your darlings. And it becomes pretty difficult to do that because you have invested so much time and effort and countless hours into those slides. So you don't want to do that. But sometimes you don't get a choice because you're limited on time. Other times you don't get a choice because, I don't know, your manager may be asking to remove those slides. And I have certainly been in both of those situations many times. And it's painful to kill your darlings after you have spent so much time on that. So my recommendation to counter that would be agreeing on the flow of the presentation, the content of the presentation, way before you start designing your slides. So start with, black and white slides, just white background, black text on the slides on what's going to go there. And only when the flow of the presentation is sealed, let's say, of course, it will never be sealed 100%, but when most of it is sealed, let's say, then you start designing your slides. So during the process, if you need to delete something, you will just be deleting some black and white slide without much design work that went onto it. So kill your darlings is actually pretty applicable in the slide design process.
Okay. And another question for you about the slide design. So what are some of the visual elements that people should be considering or should consider killing off? Like, for example, I know that for a lot of slide designers, or for a lot of designers in general, the command that, hey, we've got to have our logo on every single slide and it has to be really big. Or some other visual elements, or sometimes it's page number. We've got to have a page number on every single slide. Are there some visual elements that in this process of killing off your darlings that people should maybe consider removing from their slides?
It's a very good question, and you're so kind to ask it that way. I'm not going to be so kind to say, maybe they should consider. I'm going to say, okay, they should for one of them, which is page numbers, and I'm going to explain why. And I will say for the logo, maybe it should be considered whether it is necessary or not.
Okay.
But with the page numbers, yes, I strongly advise removing them for 2 reasons. One, you never know what you're going to talk about next in your presentation. Maybe due to some time constraints, you may have to jump from slide 3 to number 8, and you don't want to give the audience the perception that, okay, something is off.
True.
Because there may be a time where, as a presenter, I only realize that I'm going to run out of time, and I want to end gracefully. I don't want to say, okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip these slides. No, I don't want you to do that.
Okay.
But in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to jump between your slides elegantly. So that, I'm a strong advocate of removing the page numbers so that they won't be visible during the presentation. And the second reason for removing that, I would say, is to make the clear distinction between a document and a presentation. A document should have page numbers. I agree with that, especially if you have a table of contents. saying the item X is on page Y, so turn to page Y. Okay, I agree with that.
True.
And we can talk about creating documents from presentations as well. But a presentation itself is something completely different than a document. And I think page numbers have no place on the slides.
Okay. A much clearer and a much clearer and much more forcefully stated opinion than my diplomatically stated might want to consider removing.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
About the page numbers, about the logo, I can say, okay, you may want to consider if your logo is really necessary on each slide. That's a bigger topic that we may talk about in the future, but yes, I will be kind there, but with the page numbers, no, I'm not going to show your diplomatic mercy.
Okay. All right. Well, so we're about out of time, so we've got to wrap up for this week. So thank you very much, Alper, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Good talking to you.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.